Good evening and welcome to this KnowTalks session on navigating tourism through coronavirus. I'm Brandy Scott, host of the Business Breakfast on Dubai Eye 103.8, and I am extremely pleased to be speaking today from the UK to Dr. Harold Goodwin, Director of the Responsible Tourism Partnership. Dr. Goodwin, good evening.
Good evening. Thank you for inviting me.
An academic researcher and consultant, Dr. Goodwin has worked with the UN, the EU, the IFC, the World Bank, the World Travel Market, as well as governments and communities around the world on responsible tourism, which is also the subject of his latest book. A bit of housekeeping for you. We do have real-time translation to Arabic available. If you want to find the language or the interpretation option at the bottom of your screen, you can also mute the English version, the real-time version, so that you only hear the translation. You've also got an option, which I can see that many of you have found, to ask questions in the chat function, the chat rooms, the Q&A there. That's in the bottom middle of your screen, and we will cover those in the last 20 minutes of this session. What's going to happen is Dr. Goodwin is going to give a short presentation. I'm going to quiz him on it, and then you're going to quiz him on it. So we're all going to have fun, particularly Dr. Goodwin. His presentation, by the way, is going to be videoed, and it will be available to you afterwards. We will send out a URL, so you will be able to access his slides, which will also be available as a PDF. I can see that many of you are already asking for that. Right, Dr. Goodwin, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you very much indeed, Brandy. I'm going to go fairly quickly through these slides because I don't want to deny any of you the opportunity to ask those difficult questions that I'm looking forward to. I'm going to talk really about the process of going from survival through recovery to renewal, and try and draw on some of what I know is happening around the world, which may be of interest to you. I recognise that Dubai is a very special place, and I'm by no means an expert on it, and I don't have any particular research relating to Dubai, but I think some of what I'm going to talk about will be relevant to you. So I'm going to talk about travel and tourism, about the journey, about trust, about keeping in touch, about the challenge of the market, the way in which marketing is giving way to management and investment for the next generation, and finally about new markets. So if we think about the journey, one of the problems is that no destination can control this themselves. If you think about me coming to Dubai, I've got to get from home outside of London to the airport, through the airport, on the plane, and off at the other end. There's a lot of stages where I run the risk of catching coronavirus long before I get to Dubai. And of course, the risk of being locked down at home or abroad, the problems of insurance. I'm afraid that travel is going to be an uncertain process for quite a long time yet. We're by no means out of the woods on this. It isn't just a destination issue, and it's not just an airline issue. What is clear is that travel has again, for the first time in a long time really, become a risky business. I'm old enough to remember when people were sometimes a bit dubious about traveling abroad. That completely disappeared, but it's back. There's a big issue of trust, and there's a long chain of providers, plus, of course, the people you travel with, all of whom are potentially spreaders of the disease. And we can't deny the fact that travel and tourism was one of the major spreaders of COVID when it first came out of China. So travel has become a risky business again, which means that trust has moved center stage in a way in which it was perhaps not center stage a year ago. One of the things which Dubai, I noticed, has begun to do is to create the motivation and to maintain it. These are actually 3 slides from Scotland. And what's interesting about all of them is that they put the guest in the middle of the scenery. So it's all focused on the guest experience. And I think that maintaining and creating motivation for visiting a destination has become even more critical in the current context. Now, if we look at the market, sadly, I only have information on European markets. This is information from surveys done in June and July. You'll be able to get the slides in more detail. But basically what it shows is that people my age are more reluctant to travel than younger people, not surprising given our vulnerability. But you can see that between June and July, the unwillingness to travel increased. And that's from fear of COVID. I haven't seen any more recent data than this. But there's 2 issues, I think, for the future. One is the fact that we've got the fear of COVID. The second is that we've got the economic crisis, and that is going to reduce the living standards of significant numbers of people. Some will obviously profit from COVID, others will lose out significantly. Those people will have less disposable income from wherever they're traveling in the world. You can see here that there's a large number of countries which people would not consider because of COVID. You can see 53% of people, 46% for China, 40% for Denmark, 44% for Sweden. These are UK consumers saying that they wouldn't consider traveling to these destinations. I don't have comparable data for Dubai, but I imagine that people will be far less concerned about traveling to Dubai, given how successful you've been in coping with COVID. People are also concerned to prevent some kinds of tourist traveling, particularly the Americans and the Chinese, back in June and July. So health has moved center stage, and health has become the priority concern, I think, for many people when they think about where they're going to travel. So are we going to see change? And this is the question I was asked to address specifically. Will it lead to alternative transport being used? Frankly, I doubt it. I don't see that consumers have that degree of influence. They can't exert sufficient pressure to create change. What we are seeing is a lot more car travel in the UK, but that obviously will not impact on our travel to Dubai. Aviation will remain the main way in which people travel. I also think that part of the problem is that people are talking a lot about what they hope will happen, but very often there's no plan. And as Antoine de Saint-Exupéry said, a goal without a plan is just a wish. And there's a lot of wishful thinking about seeing change on the climate at the moment. It may be that what we're seeing at the moment is little more than an empty slogan. I wait to see, but I'm nervous. We certainly need to live within our planetary boundaries, and that is going to require government action. It's not going to happen through the marketplace. Will we see a tourism boom? I think there's every reason to think that tourism will grow back very quickly once people feel safe to travel. The alternative view, of course, is that virtual reality will offer the benefits to many potential consumers, and it may in the future reduce the amount of travel. I'm not sure. I'm not sure whether the development of online gaming, for example, will change consumer habits. I don't think it's just about COVID. It's also about what's happening to the way in which we perceive the world. And there's a whole generation much younger than me growing up used to seeing the world through virtual reality. If we move on to the question of marketing and management, it's clear that the management of a destination must be the responsibility of the government. They represent the local people. They hold the circle between the competing interests, between the visitors, the businesses, the local community. We've had a lot of over-tourism in the world. That's been a consequence of paying little more than lip service. We need to see more focus on using marketing as a tool to attract the kind of tourists that a destination like Dubai wants to receive, and also to manage the tourists and their expectations when they arrive. So I don't think over-tourism is going to go away. It's going to remain a major issue. We're not going to see the end of tourism because of COVID. Amsterdam and partners have begun to change the way in which they market Amsterdam to attract a different kind of tourist, to slow them down, to give them more opportunity to learn about the place, and to encourage them to travel around the city in a more sustainable way. I think there are lots of opportunities for all destinations to do that. Barcelona has talked about rediscovery. That's a city which has managed over-tourism probably better than any other city. They're certainly the world leaders, in my view, in managing over-tourism. It's quite interesting to see them coming out now, post-COVID, talking about the activities which domestic tourists and tourists from abroad can enjoy in living in Barcelona. If we talk about the next generation, it seems to me that the UAE will remain a very important hub for tourism going forward. The hubs may become even more important as we move to hydrogen-fueled planes, and the idea of flying non-stop from the UK to Australia becomes impossible with a hydrogen-fueled plane. at least for the foreseeable future. So the hubs may become even more important, which raises particular issues about how you manage the health risks as passengers in transit mix at security and in the lounges. And I think that is going to be a source of anxiety. If I think about my own travel, one of my biggest sources of anxiety is the public transport to the airport in the UK and then passing through Heathrow, because a lot of people from all over the world are going to be mixing in quite close proximity. So I think the issues around health security in airports will come to the fore. Stopovers, if we see a growth in hub and spoke activity, will become more and more important, but they can only offer a taste of the destination, and that taste needs to be highly attractive to encourage a repeat visit. And I have to say that I've only once had a stopover tour in Dubai. I did it not because I hadn't been to Dubai, I've been to Dubai several times before, and I like the place, but I have to say the experience I had on the stopover would not have encouraged me to come back. That, I think, is an issue. You need to be sure that the quality of the stopover is such that people will want to return. The other thing I think which is really important is that the experience needs to be greater than the visit. The visit experience needs to be better than the photograph. I remember going up to the Great Wall in 1983 with a large group of tourists. I was one of the first people leading tours into China in '83 as it opened. And you could hardly see the wall for the number of Chinese domestic tourists who were on the wall, and the photograph on the right demonstrates that. In reality, the experience of the wall is actually a lot better from the photographs without the people on them. And that, I think, is an issue. Need to be very clear with the tourists about what the actual experience will be like when they get there. The other thing to say is that we're seeing a massive growth in the expectation of a genuine experience. We're seeing the growth of the experience economy across the whole of consumerism and a real focus on authenticity. Availability and cost are no longer the major things that people are concerned about. They're concerned about quality and about authentic, real encounters. And that means that the guide and the tourists need to be in a teaching relationship. The guide needs to be facilitating a real understanding of the local culture if the tourist is to get the authentic experience that they crave. So what we're seeing across tourism in general is a growth in experiential tourism. We're seeing people concerned about value for money. They're still concerned about that, but they're more concerned about the experience for money. So people are traveling for shorter trips and spending more money per day because they're looking for these engaging experiences with the local culture, the local community, with the environment. And of course, the memories that we want people to bring away are a shared product of the relationship between the host and the guest. People are looking for quality and depth in those experiences because that's what creates the memories. And it's those memories which make for the viral marketing, which will drive increased tourism of the right kind for any destination. You should be able to taste the difference with one of these experiential responsible tourism products. So there's a broader consumer trend towards people wanting the experience economy, where what is real is valued, where people are looking to spend their money and their time on things which will give them original, genuine, sincere, authentic experiences. And those are some images from the UAE, which I think provide that kind of thing. The guides are really the teachers, interpreters of the culture and the environment. And Keith Henry, who's a Métis Native American from Canada, said recently in one of the interviews that I conducted in the run-up to World Travel Market, if it's not about us, it can't be about us if it's without us. We have to be involved, it's about us. And I think what we want to see in the UAE when we come to visit is to be introduced to the place by a local person who understands the culture and the environment. Authenticity is that new strain of consumer desire that the Harvard economists have identified. In terms of new markets, I think people are looking for rural traditions, a different tourism, for a slow food and a slow tourism experience. and looking as well for a different kind of experience of cities where there's more opportunity to get closer to the city itself and the people who live there, rather than to see it from the top of a building or through the windows of a coach. Bordeaux has relaunched itself. It's a French resort city, a commercial city in the wine growing region. They've relaunched themselves as a responsible destination, which is quite a brave thing to do, I think, in the current context, but it's working for them. So what I think I'm saying to you is we're going to go from survival to recovery. Unfortunately, COVID is the new normal until, at least until there's an effective treatment and the vaccine has been spread around the world. We have to recognize that there's going to be, at best, a lot more ambivalence about tourism amongst both hosts and the travelers, the guests. Some aspects of sustainability will be enhanced, but others will be further delayed. Thank you for listening. Oh, I should just say, I'm sorry to do this, actually. I'd forgotten I'd put this slide in. I debated long and hard whether to put it in. This slide is actually from a UN publication, and it shows the outbreaks of potentially epidemic diseases between 2011 and 2018. 1,400 epidemic events in 172 countries. It would be foolish, I think, to expect that there may never be another example of COVID. We need this time to keep our guard up and not to assume that the problem will go away. It may recur at any point. And obviously there have been several in recent years with SARS and MERS, for example, which were carefully controlled at the time. Unfortunately, COVID was not. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Goodwin. Let's kick off by talking about responsible tourism itself before I ask you some questions about your slides, because I'm aware that there is a difference between responsible tourism and sustainable tourism. And I'm wondering actually if what we will define as responsible tourism is changing or will change with this pandemic.
Okay, well, the difference is simply said in a way. Sustainability is the objective. And the reason that responsible tourism came to the fore in the 2003 conference in Cape Town alongside the World Summit was the sense that people were talking about sustainability, but not doing anything about it. So the simplest way to think about the difference is sustainability is the objective, responsibility by people taking responsibility is how you actually achieve sustainability. But the agenda of responsible tourism has always been broader than the sustainable objective because it's about making tourism better. So, for example, one of the big campaigns that we've successfully run through the responsible tourism movement was about visits to orphanages and volunteering in orphanages, which doesn't come up in the sustainability agenda. And obviously the concern that people have about their health is absolutely fundamental to any responsible approach. And we've seen many international tourism organizations putting concern for health and taking responsibility for health at the top of their agendas.
Will what counts as being responsible, I mean, and I guess who's responsible for it? You mentioned governments taking more responsibility. Will or is that changing with COVID?
What counts as responsibility changes according to what the local issues are. Now, the interesting thing about COVID is it's pretty much an international issue. So we've now probably got 3 international issues on the responsible tourism agenda: climate change, plastics, because they end up in the oceans and travel all over the world, and COVID, because again, that's not something you can isolate yourself from. Many of the other issues are local. In problems, for example, over wood supply, it's fundamentally a local issue. It's a local issue that occurs in many places, but doesn't occur everywhere. So what we would say is that the responsibility is to address those issues which occur locally. And clearly COVID is a risk anywhere in the world, and therefore COVID will be on the agenda for responsible tourism everywhere in the world. Whose responsibility is that raises a different set of questions, because it's interesting to me to see the speed with which the big international hotels moved to reassure their consumers, their visitors, their guests, that their place was COVID secure, and they've done a very good job of that. But the difficulty is that the tourist, as I was saying, the visitor has to travel from home on public transport or by taxi to the airport, through security, through check-in, through the departure lounge, through the airport, and then all the same things again to get there to their hotel at the other end. So in reality, it's very difficult to see how a hotel can guarantee a safe journey. They can guarantee a safe experience when they get there. And of course, nobody's going to forget the images we've seen from the USA of the behavior of Americans in some parts of the States, not all of it, but in some parts of the States, refusing to wear masks and crowding and so on, which would, for instance, make me very nervous about going to some parts of the States, because I'd be worried about whether, even if the hotel was safe, whether it would be safe for me to leave the hotel, given the COVID risk and the extent of the COVID pandemic in many American cities.
What do you think the answer will be to getting people moving again? Is it the health passports that have been mooted by IATA and some governments, and the experiments that are going on with some airlines? Is it vaccination passports and proof of vaccinations? And if so, do we then get into the weeds with which vaccinations are acceptable in which areas? We've had Alan Joyce, the CEO of Qantas, suggesting that we could get to the stage where individual airlines refuse to take people without vaccines, although I've also spoken to the local representative of IATA here, who said very politely that it wasn't Mr. Joyce's choice to make. That would be a government choice. What do you see as the impetus for movement?
I think it's really hard to answer that at the moment. I mean, we don't even know. I mean, you'll know that they're beginning to roll out a vaccination now for people over 80 in the UK. But there has to be people have to have 2 injections 3 weeks apart. And only a further week after that can they regard themselves as having any immunity. And we don't know how long that immunity will last. So it's very difficult to see how, on the basis of that, you could issue a piece of paper which would say this person is safe to travel. So whilst I might individually know that I regard myself as safe to travel because I've had the injection, at the moment, I can't be that certain that I am safe. And certainly the immigration official, when I arrive in Dubai, can't know which vaccine I had, how certain it is that I'm not carrying the disease. Because presumably some vaccines may take away the symptoms, but not take away your potential to carry the disease. So I'm personally quite pessimistic about this. I think there's still some way from people having the degree of certainty about travel that we would like them to have. And of course, one of the big risks is that you travel somewhere. Let's take South Africa as an example, where I'm hoping I might be able to travel next year. But I may well find myself in South Africa and then either locked down in South Africa and not able to get on a plane to come home, or find that my own country is demanding that I quarantine for 2 weeks when I return. So the thing is just full of uncertainties, and I'm not clear in my own mind how a piece of paper is going to resolve that.
But everyone has different risk appetites. And I mean, certainly we've seen here in Dubai at the moment with the air corridor that has been set up with the UK, there has been an influx of British tourists. Hoteliers are telling us that. Emirates has had to warn that we are now in the busy season for the airport up until the 21st. And that's expats and citizens and residents going out as well. So some people will travel. Do you think we are going to see in the next 6 months sort of almost a dam bursting with pent-up demand when people are hopefully able to move a little bit more?
Well, the tourism professional in me would like to say yes. The concerned citizen in me thinks probably not. I mean, the period at the moment is obviously one of the maximum periods of personal desire to travel because of the visit friends and relatives imperative over Christmas, which I think will increase the demand that people have to travel. Whether that will be sustained, we wait to see. But the more important question in a way is how Dubai will respond if that influx of tourists brings an increase in the epidemic in Dubai. And that, I think, is the big unknown. Destinations are coming in and out of lockdown really quickly at the moment. I mean, Germany, for example, has just gone into a major lockdown. The UK has decided to relax the restrictions over Christmas, but almost certainly will go into a major lockdown as a consequence of that in January. So I think the ability to travel immediately when you know what the situation is may well be attractive to people, but it changes so fast, it could easily change while you're abroad.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Is domestic tourism then the answer? We've just seen a massive domestic tourism campaign launched here.
Yeah.
It's a federal campaign across the Emirates.
I think it absolutely is. And I mean, luckily for the Emirates, clearly Emirati are, plus the expatriate population in the Emirates, are sufficiently wealthy to travel. And that is clearly the way. We've seen that in the UK. Every country has had a massive increase in domestic travel. Having said that, there are many countries around the world dependent on tourism. I think places like the Gambia and some of the small island developing states, which really are never going to have domestic tourism. And for them, the situation is very grim. Domestic tourism won't be part of the solution for those countries. It will be for the Emirates, and that's clearly the way to go. But if you look at the UK, we've had major problems with people traveling from areas of high pandemic to areas of low, and concern in the same way about international travel, about domestic travel, where there are major differences in the prevalence of the virus between different areas.
We've had a question in, actually. I'm going to throw it in, given that we have just been speaking about vaccines, because it's a good one. It came in Arabic and our translators have translated it, so thank you. Do you think that we will see amongst all of this vaccine tourism? Not airlines like Emirates carrying the vaccine around the world, but people traveling from country to country to either get a vaccine if none is available, or to get a different vaccine if they have more faith in maybe the AstraZeneca or the Sinopharm or the Pfizer.
I come back to what I said before, Brandy, in the sense that the issue is clearly there's an issue for the individual about which vaccine they think will most adequately protect them. Clearly the case. But in terms of what I can then do, the question is much more what the local authorities regard my vaccine status as being. So I'm not sure that for me, for example, the UK government will decide which vaccines it's going to accept and which it's not. And that won't be something which I can affect. The airlines will do the same thing, won't they, if they do move towards insisting that everyone who gets on a plane has already been vaccinated. And the immigration officials at the other end will do the same. So I'm not sure that that's going to happen. I can see why people think it might, but I don't think in the end it will for the vast majority of people.
Well, we've got a couple of questions in about business tourism, which is interesting. Dubai obviously being not just a community of business people who are normally used to flying in and out, and there's been a lot of cabin fever on that in that regard, trust me, but also a major MICE destination as well, you know, meetings, incentives, conferences and exhibition. We're used to getting that business coming in to the city. Which do you think will come back first, business or leisure tourism?
I don't see that either will come back first. I think it's about the scale of them. We will begin to see some business travel. The UK has relaxed the rules for some categories of sports people, actors and other forms of performers and artists, and for senior business travellers. On the grounds, I guess, that smaller numbers of people mean that there are smaller numbers of people likely to bring an illness back with them into the UK, and that would be true for any destination. So I think we will see more of that. Personally, I'm looking forward very much to, well, I'm hoping I'll be able to come out to ATM, but you know, it's not at all clear to me what the situation will be with the virus around the world, and what view the authorities in the Emirates will be taking about which countries they are happy to have visitors from and which they're more nervous about. So I think it's really hard to say. Leisure tourism will come back as quickly as it can. And clearly those people who've got second homes in Dubai, and there are a fair number of those people are going to want to get back to the winter sun that they crave when you're looking at a grey winter in the UK.
How much will the tech that we have adopted during COVID, I mean, Zoom, other meeting platforms are available, how much will they realistically take out of the business travel market, do you think?
I was talking to a friend who works quite senior at Barclays Bank, and he's not expecting to travel on business for some time. And the reason for that is the nervousness of the employers of having employees, particularly well-paid senior employees, travel with the risk that they may, as a consequence of that travel, contract COVID and might then take a case against the company. So, I mean, I think there are all kinds of reasons why there will be significant constraints on the development of business travel for that reason, because of the employer's responsibility from some jurisdictions for the health and safety of its employees. Once there's a totally reliable vaccine, perhaps, and they can vaccinate their staff, perhaps that will make travel easier. But I think we're still some way away from that. I think it's a way off yet.
Is there an opportunity in all of this? Silver lining's a little bit trite, but a small bit of lemonade that we can make, if you like, from these lemons. While numbers are low, whilst volumes are down, planes are out of the sky, to make some gains on the responsible tourism front. And how would we do that?
Look, I think that's definitely already happening. If you look at the way in which products are being reshaped to offer people a deeper experience. I mean, Taleb Rifai, former Secretary General of the UN WTO, and I interviewed him recently, was pointing out that there are the global nomads, the people who can work from anywhere in the world. And if they come and stay for 2 months rather than a weekend, they will have a better experience. The carbon impact of that journey will be significantly less, and the local economy will benefit more. I think there are all kinds of things we can do with that. We can encourage people to take longer trips. When I was tour operating back in the early 90s, before I took on the academic career, I was quite frequently selling 3-week trips. That's almost unheard of now. And of course, for the younger generation, taking a long weekend in Europe, which would never be more than 3 days, has become a big part of their expectation of travel. And that has increased the carbon emissions from flying significantly. So there are things we can do by encouraging people to stay longer and making it easier to stay longer, giving people a discount if they stay longer in the hotel, are all ways in which we can use this opportunity. And the other opportunity, which we are seeing, but it's not good news for destinations, is the virtual experience of the destination. I mean, if you want to see the Mona Lisa, Brandy, would you be better to see it in great detail over an electronic link of some kind, preferably with someone to explain what you're looking at? Or would you see it better by crowding around the picture with 300 other people in the Louvre? And the truth is, you probably get a better experience of it on your screen in front of you on your desk.
Are we going to be happy with that, though? I mean, we're all getting a little bit iPadded out, to be perfectly honest. I know that we have a lot of, virtual reality options, headsets, and all the rest of it. But I also know the numbers of sales for those haven't boomed in the way that people who were predicting 4 or 5 years ago that we would be happy taking virtual tours of the Serengeti through an Oculus Rift may have predicted.
I don't think that, I think if you want to go to the Serengeti, you don't want to see it virtually. I think if you want to see, we've just had a series of 3 brilliant programs on the BBC showing beneath the city streets of Rome, Venice, and Naples. And you get to see those cities through virtual reality in a way you can't see them. Mind you, the food's not very good in virtual reality. So I think it's a matter of the motivation to travel, and it may well be. I mean, as a consequence of seeing the one on Florence, I'm extremely keen to go to Florence now. So there's a complicated relationship between these things. And I think those places which can use it, it's what I was meaning when I looked at those slides about creating meaningful connections. Lots of opportunities to use virtual reality and TV and video and so on to make people want to go and experience the thing for real. So it's going to be a matter of who learns to use that technology best. And there is a younger generation which is growing up much more used to seeing the world virtually. Not my generation, but there is a younger generation that is content with that.
It's also a generation that's more used to booking its own travel, going independent, using gig economy operators, be it Airbnb, be it Uber. What do you see as this pandemic meaning for, I mean, we've just seen Airbnb's mammoth IPO, more than double in value in its first day of listing. What do you see as this pandemic meaning for those more, I hate the word sharing economy, it's not sharing if you're paying, but the gig economy, the side hustle economy, rather than the conventional players, the massive hotel chains?
I think one of the truths about COVID is that it isn't. I think the better way of understanding COVID is to say there's two things which have happened. The first is that people are more concerned about their health, and the trust agenda has moved to the forefront. You no longer just take it for granted that you'll be safe. The second thing to say is that COVID has accelerated trends which were happening anyway. So we see that on the UK high street. We see all kinds of dimensions of the way in which people do business, the use of virtual reality, the use of online meetings, and so on. So I think COVID has speeded up a series of processes which were probably taking place anyway. So it's hard to predict what's going to happen, but the disintermediation of the way in which that younger generation of travelers travel is for real. Whether, of course, when they get to my age and perhaps want to travel more comfortably and have their room cleaned every day by somebody in a hotel, whether they'll still be traveling on Airbnb, who knows? We don't really know yet. Is that something which younger people do, or is it something which which may become a habit, or is it something which is something young people do and then middle-aged and older people choose to travel in a different way? We don't know yet, and I think that is the reality we need to think about. That it will be different in different destinations. It will be different for different kinds of experiences, and it will be different for different generations.
How does the economic impact of COVID feature in on responsible tourism? As countries are able to open up, there is going to be in a lot of places a certain amount of desperation, if you like. There will be industries that have been decimated, tourism industries and communities that have been decimated. How do we make sure that tourism is then done responsibly when people are going to be very concerned to get as much of the tourism dollar as they can?
I think it's extremely difficult, and it always has been difficult. If you look at what happens in many destinations around, for example, hawking, selling goods on the street, the kinds of tourism which in a way Dubai doesn't have a problem with, but the kind of sex tourism dimension that was a big problem in Eastern Europe, immediately as those countries began to open up, those issues will recur, because wherever you've got people with money and people who are desperate to get money, you will get an increase in crime and other forms of exchange which most governments would prefer not to occur. So that is going to require policing and regulation to stop that happening. On the Airbnb side, I don't know, maybe we'll see a reduction in the cost of staying in accommodation in some cities as there's a surfeit of supply over demand. It's all subject to supply and demand after all. I think it's very hard to talk in generalizations about this. It'll be less of a problem in Dubai than it might be in a city in the developing world, for example.
I mean, NADA has asked how governments can help basically support businesses that have been struggling to prioritize sustainability. NADA's worried that sustainability will be deprioritized.
I think there's a very serious risk of that, not only in tourism, but across the whole agenda. On the other hand, there is a realization amongst many consumers that COVID is a terrible thing, but you can at least isolate yourself from the effects of it. It's much harder to isolate yourself from the effects of climate change, for example. I think there is increasing awareness of climate change. Whether that means that, whether the awareness will lead to action is the big question, because everybody would prefer to say that it's the responsibility of government or someone else to sort that problem out. And clearly, individuals can't sort those problems out on their own, although they are a part of the solution. So I think that Nada's absolutely right. It's a very big risk as we come out of this particular lockdown, series of lockdowns around the world, that sustainability will simply go out of the window as people are desperate to make money again.
Is it already losing ground in the, I mean, certainly in the headline stakes, but I mean, we've got the Climate Ambition Summit started Sunday. Before COVID, we were all, Greta and school strikes and flight shaming. And we don't talk about those things anymore. Where is the danger just in these issues sort of slipping from the rhetoric?
We don't talk about anything but COVID, really, do we? I think that is a very real danger, and COVID will continue to dominate the agenda, and not so much in the UK because our agenda has been dominated by Brexit and COVID. But you can imagine, even with 24-hour news coverage, the coverage of other issues like climate change will retreats into the background. It becomes very difficult to see it. I don't think COVID will remain dominant in a couple of years' time. But the truth is, the next 10 years are the critical time for dealing with climate change. And we really do need to refocus on climate change above all the other issues that we confront. Climate change, biodiversity loss, and COVID are the three major issues that we need to be addressing. And the truth is that at the individual level, concern about COVID and therefore the news is dominated by COVID most of the time.
But how do we do that from a financial point of view? I mean, governments have spent a huge amount of money, are spending a huge amount of money propping up their economies. Airlines are trying to borrow a huge amount of money from governments to prop up their airlines. Where does the financial willingness to tackle climate change come from? What actually is going to need to happen, practically happen from the top?
Well, let's turn this around and be optimistic. I mean, it has been extraordinary how much. I mean, we ran a panel in June looking at sustainable aviation fuels, which was quite groundbreaking at the time. By the time we got to WTM in November, that agenda had been really replaced with optimism about hydrogen-powered flight, which Airbus has now adopted. And I've just been blogging today about it, and there are 4, 5, or 6 other major initiatives around the world moving towards hydrogen-powered flight. The old adage, never waste a crisis, is obviously true. The European Union is proceeding with its green agenda and its clean skies agenda. There is public money available to support investment in green technologies. It isn't all hopeless, but it is much more difficult in a world strapped for cash and where large numbers of people have seen very significant reductions in their standard of living. But many people won't be able to afford to travel by air for a while until their incomes recover. Demand will be suppressed by reduction in people's incomes and their disposable incomes, particularly if we see inflation as a consequence of the economic changes that we're seeing.
What does that mean for airlines? I mean, you mentioned the hub and spoke model earlier, the model of taking multiple flights to get somewhere. I mean, the Emirates model, if you like. We've seen Etihad say that it's going to become a mid-sized airline with a lot of focus on its narrow-body planes. Do you see the hub and spoke model becoming less important for both health reasons and financial reasons if people are traveling shorter distances, and the point-to-point model taking a bit more prominence? Well,
I think the point-to-point model is popular and it's environmentally preferable too, because it's the takeoff and landing which consumes a lot of the fuel. So point-to-point has been the orthodoxy for a long time around how you reduce the carbon emissions without reducing the amount you fly. The problem is that hydrogen is unlikely to result in long distance flying. So if we do move to a hydrogen based aviation industry, which isn't going to happen before the 2040s, I wouldn't have thought, but it's quite likely that in that situation, hub and spoke becomes more prevalent in the model. I think it's really hard to know where these two, in a way, competing trends, that which one will win out and in what way. But again, it will vary according to how far you're going to fly.
Do you see, and you mentioned there that some people will have less money to travel. Do you see not just a growing inequality, but a new type of inequality coming out of this pandemic, a health inequality as well, if you like, a vaccination inequality?
Sure. I mean, the problem with all of these things when they occur internationally is that they do create inequality, don't they? And there's always been a travel inequality. It always makes me laugh when you see the UN WTO figures that X billion of people have traveled. It's not quite accurate. Some of us traveled several times and have been counted multiple numbers of times in that headline figure. The truth is the vast majority of the world's population doesn't travel or get on a plane from one year's end to the next. So, you know, it clearly is an unequal thing. That's absolutely the case. And obviously there's also the question of how the migrant workers, the seasonally migrant workers, how they would travel, given that the cost of aviation may increase. If it does, that will be another problem. I think, Randy, I'm sorry I'm being very unhelpful, I think, but I'm trying to be honest and not to pretend a certainty where I don't have it. I think the future is extremely uncertain.
And yet people like to be able to put dates and numbers and projections.
Sure,
these things.
Of course, particularly our Prime Minister. But the reality is that they very often come a cropper, don't they?
Well,
about not to be right. You know, I'm reminded of the First World War. That was going to be over by Christmas. And they meant that Christmas. They didn't mean Christmas 4 years later, which is what it turned out to be. I think, you know, there is an optimism in human beings sometimes to assume that solutions will emerge much more quickly than they can. And I may equally well be being pessimistic, and perhaps I'm wrong, and perhaps solutions will emerge more quickly. But the sheer scale of this, I mean, even if there was enough vaccine, the opportunity to vaccinate the whole world against COVID is effectively what needs to be done to really stamp it out. Look how long it took us to get rid of smallpox and measles and polio. You know, these are not things which you get rid of overnight. It takes a massive effort. And it's not clear to me that the major powers are that engaged internationally at the moment. They are perhaps understandably particularly concerned about what's happening in their own country without, I mean, you've just seen the UK reduce its commitment to overseas aid, and the UK will not be alone in that. You know, as money becomes tighter, the money available for the developing world becomes less.
And what's the danger of that, particularly if we look at it from a tourism and tourism livelihood point of view? Well,
if you take the example of the Gambia, which is a country I'm passionate about, I'm very fond of the Gambia. It's a great destination if you want to go to West Africa. They've had their borders closed since March. I mean, closed. No flights, no, very, very limited land border traffic as well. They've done that to protect their population against COVID because they don't have a health service that could cope if they had if the epidemic came in there. So, you know, countries like that will survive, and the Gambia is a very productive place. You know, it'll feed itself, but it has effectively been cut off, other than virtually, from the rest of the world.
What then about the possibility of these travel bubbles? I mean, I'm a New Zealander. My Prime Minister came out this morning and said that she was in discussion with Cook Island nations and Australia as well about the possibility of a travel bubble. Short-term, medium-term, long-term solution?
Well, it's all of those things, isn't it? So long as you've got a similar level of prevalence of the virus in each of the places in the bubble. There was a lot of optimism about Germany at one stage. I mean, I've been really surprised to see the way the epidemic took off again in Germany. I mean, I'm living here in Kent. We were fine until about 3 weeks ago, when suddenly we've gone into tier 3. So, you know, the bubble, the virus comes and goes really quite quickly between different jurisdictions. And in that context, the bubbles are quite difficult to run, aren't they? Because they do assume a similar level of the R factor in all of the places in the bubble. And if the R moves around, then countries will come in and out of air corridors and bubbles.
We've got some fantastic questions coming in from people around the world. We've got journalists from Egypt. We've got PhD students from Algeria asking you questions. We've got people from Nairobi. I mean, this is fantastic. Speaking of pessimism, here is one for you. What if the vaccines don't do what is promised? How bad could that be for tourism? And what does that mean for countries if the tourism sectors shrink? That's coming from Shanine in Algeria.
Well, Algeria's seen the consequences of what happens when tourism shrinks in the recent past. The responsible tourism position on this has always been that it is dangerous to be dependent on any one economic sector. If you're over dependent on tourism, it's a massive vulnerability. There's no disguising that. The Gambia has been take the Gambia as an example again, that has been very dependent upon tourism for its overseas earnings, for its foreign exchange earnings. But it is a very fertile country, so they are at least able to feed themselves. And I think that is the critical issue when you're in extremis. And some of the Pacific Islands are a much more difficult situation without tourism, I suspect, than other places. And the truth is, again, it's really hard to generalize about these things.
What do you want to see happen now? If you could have a couple of things for Christmas that you saw governments, world tourism bodies, aviation bodies, airlines doing, Dr. Goodwin, what would you like in your stocking?
It would be great, wouldn't it, to have a number of vaccines which we were certain offered long-term protection and which had been thoroughly tested and which we had the money to roll out around the world. But nobody's going to give me that Christmas present. It may be that by Christmas in 5 years' time, we'll have that, but it isn't going to happen quickly. Some places will come out of the problems more quickly than others, but it is going to be a very varied situation for a long time.
Do you want to take a punt on who you see at the moment as the winners and the losers, bearing in mind what you said about Germany and what we saw Germany decide about another extended, certainly business and school shutdown this morning?
No, I don't.
Okay, let me put that another way. What is who the winners and the losers are going to be based on?
It's going to be on it has to be based on their ability to deal with the internal public health issues. So what they're able to do at home, which is in a way unrelated to tourism. But the tourism effect is whether they are able to redevelop their tourism, and domestic tourism is the best way to do it. Whether they're able to redevelop their tourism in a different way so that they're not vulnerable to the virus being imported. You know, we cannot hide from the fact that the virus was spread out of Wuhan largely by people traveling back from doing business, some of them being on holiday, some of them studying. And they brought it back with them around the world. And the spread was much more rapid than it might otherwise have been without international aviation. We can't hide from that. We have to find ways of dealing with it. And I suspect that the reality is that we need much more effective testing. Because if you could test people on departure and on arrival and know that the person wasn't carrying the virus, because the asymptomatic character of this virus is also a major problem. If you were able to be certain of that, that would free up people to travel very quickly.
What are the best?
Don't have that test yet.
What are the best things that a government can do now to support its tourism sector?
I think again, there's a number of different things. I mean, one thing that destinations must do is to maintain their relationship with the potential travelers. So that's critical. Rethinking what you're offering in ways that increase trust is probably also very important. I mean, it's clear that people are going to be more willing to travel to rural areas that avoid crowded spaces, cities, art galleries, and so on. They're more likely, seeing this in Korea, a big effort to encourage people to travel and experience the outside. And Dubai has lots of opportunities for that as well, particularly in the winter, to experience the natural environment where the risks are lower. So you can do those things. You can look at testing on arrival, and some countries will do that. Some are already doing it. You can look at looking for people who've been vaccinated, but as I say, we don't yet really know what the vaccines will deliver. We know they increase the antibody count, and we know that some of them at least have been very successful in reducing the number of people catching it, but we don't know whether those people who've been vaccinated may still be carriers. We simply, we don't have the science on that yet. So all these things take time. But I think it is a matter of ad hoc solutions which meet the specific needs of particular destinations and particular markets.
I read possibly the most pessimistic headline I've seen so far this morning, and it came from The Economist, and it was, what will the second year of the pandemic look like? It was a
I've seen that too. I think it's absolutely right.
What do you think the second year of the pandemic travel-wise will look like?
I don't know. Look, I think we economics is always uncertain. Epidemics are uncertain. So what we've got now is, and the way climate change is going to impact on us is another area of uncertainty. And we probably face multiple causes of uncertainty on a scale that we haven't really previously seen. There is an ongoing climate crisis, which is demonstrably getting worse from year to year. We have an ongoing global epidemic, which comes and goes with the seasons. And we have an economic crisis with so much money being spent that people around me are talking about where they found the money tree. Now, at the moment, that's fine, but we also know that quantitative easing and the money tree can lead to inflation. So the future is in multiple ways extremely uncertain. I tend to agree with The Economist. I think very few people have got any idea what the next year will look like. And particularly given that this is being recorded, I don't think I'm going to put my head in that noose, Brandy. Tempting though it is.
We'll leave it there then. Dr. Goodwin, thank you very much for your time this evening. Thank you for your presentation. A reminder that this session has been recorded, and a URL will be sent out. So you will be able to watch it again. You will also be able to access those slides, the PDF of them, if you would like to take a bit more time with Dr. Goodwin's presentation. I do have to thank the Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum Knowledge Foundation and the UNDP for making today's session possible, and also just say how incredibly impressed I am by the wide scope of people that we have joining us. I mentioned that we had academics from Kenya, from Egypt, from Algeria. I've just seen one pop up from Penang in Malaysia. One of the most, I think, multinational crowds that I have seen in terms of where people are actually based rather than just where they are from on one of these webinars. So that is excellent. And Dr. Harold Goodwin, of course, thank you very much for your time and your insights and your careful avoidance of putting your head in my noose this evening.
Brandy, you brought a very nice noose, and I hope I have managed to resist it completely. I would just say there appear to be 292 people still online, which is amazing. And I'm very grateful for the opportunity. And anything I've said today, which is about the past, is a lot more reliable than anything I've said today about the future. But thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you.